Welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. Hosted by the editors of Writer's Digest, this monthly podcast features conversations with writing and publishing experts whose insights will help ignite your creative vision, hone your skills, build your platform, and get your work out into the world.
Hello everyone, I'm Michael Woodson, and welcome to Writer's Digest Presents. This month, we are talking all about literary criticism and trying to define it as best we can. I am interested in this topic because I've always enjoyed literary criticism, and I've liked the difference between literary criticism and book reviews, and also where they intersect, and what that can mean for authors and writers, people who are maybe interested in writing literary criticism. But also when authors can and should ignore or avoid conversations about their work and how that can just get in the way of the creative process. And today I'm speaking with Grace Byron. Grace is an author and a literary critic, and we talk about everything. We talk about how social media has transformed literary criticism. We talk about how hard it is to get published as literary critic, the rise in Substack and those sorts of platforms to help with getting your voice out there and people understanding the way you write and your tone. We talk about it all. So without further ado, Writer's Digest presents Grace Byron. Grace, thank you so much for joining me today and joining Writer's Digest for this conversation. I'm really excited to talk about literary criticism and where you think it stands. But before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners?
Yeah, my name is Grace Byron. I'm a writer, a journalist, a critic. I write in a range of mediums. I also have written a novel called Herculean. I have a books column at Defector, and then I also freelance write for outlets like The New Yorker and The Nation and Book Forum and Granta, Paris Review, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of jack of all trades. I kind of try to do it all. Yeah.
I'm really curious about this conversation. Today we're talking about literary criticism in general, but I'm particularly curious about, I am curious about its evolution over time. I think there are a lot of factors that play into what literary criticism looks like today, but I am curious, just to get us started, do you have a particular definition for yourself of what it is to be a literary critic, what literary criticism is, anything of the like?
It's a good question. I think it's something that I really stumbled into by accident. And so I was really trying to write fiction, was trying to write a novel, but that takes a lot of time and takes, it can be years before you sell a book. You can be working on a book for a long time, but you can review a book in a much shorter comparatively timeline, and you can potentially get paid for that. And so to me, I think literary criticism is at its heart writing about books while also paying attention to your own style. So I think it's sort of those two elements combined. It's not just sort of like a trade publication review. It's part of the ecosystem. I think that's important and lovely. And there are some really lovely and smart and funny trade publication reviews. But I do think literary criticism is usually a bit longer, a bit chewier, right, and has a little bit of a self-conscious or self-referential, sometimes to its detriment, kind of a tone or limits.
You're also touching on something that I think is I could be wrong, but I think there is a misconception sometimes about literary criticism as being synonymous with being a book critic. And there is a Venn diagram there, like often they intersect, but I am interested in where they are different. And I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about where those things are different.
Yeah, I've been trying to chew on that because I think in a lot of ways, what counts as literature is such a self-congratulatory, sometimes masturbatory project to sort of be like, this is canon and this isn't, or this is literary fiction and this is just fiction, or this is commercial and this isn't. I think those definitions are important to some degree. I think they're really important to booksellers and people behind the scenes. I think the average person is not, there was just another huge article about literacy declining. And so a lot of the average people, they're just going to be like, it's a book, right? I think the average person, unfortunately, I'm not even sure if they recognize the difference between like fiction and nonfiction. Yeah. And so I think it's a very select amount of people who are actually trying to create what counts as literary and what doesn't. I think also in that way, it's like, okay, well, what's a book? and what is literature is like a sort of equally freighted question. And so what would you count like the J.D. Vance memoir as literature? Or is that being just a book critic? Or is that like an instance where that comes through? And then it's like, well, books are also a vessel for culture and politics. So whereas like Rachel Cusk and writing about that may be seen as like, okay, you're doing something like high and literary, but a politician's memoir, maybe not so, or a self-help book, but those are equally, I think, worthy of writing about sometimes, and will maybe reach a different kind of an audience. And I think a lot of it has to do with what platform outlet you're writing for, right? Like if you're writing for Harper's or NYRB, that's going to be considered more literary than if you're writing for, I don't know, like a 600-word review somewhere smaller or less high-minded or something. It's, like these are debates we've had about like what counts as middlebrow and highbrow, I think for decades, and I don't think they'll ever be solved in some ways.
Yeah. As you are tackling those things yourself as a writer, do you feel the voice changes, and maybe does it change naturally depending on what you're doing in terms of like if you are writing something that's maybe a little bit meatier for another publication versus like a 600-word book review?
I don't love doing a 600-word book review. I feel like I've done it less and less over time. I think there's also less and less places that are doing that now. Yes. I think there's kind of a big gap in the market where it's either people are writing really short things, almost like maximum blurbs or trade reviews, and then there's like 3,000-word reviews in The Nation or Book Forum or The Baffler. And there's less and less outlets that are even doing literary coverage. This is, I think, part of why I recently wrote a piece about like in defense of small magazines.
I love
they're
that
all
piece.
Closing. Thank you. And I think that they fill a really important role in the sort of literary ecosystem. And so I do think in general, I prefer to be able to go long and be voicey. But I do occasionally, like I just wrote about the J.D. Vance memoir, that's why it's on my mind. And I do feel like there's a more, I don't know, every book, every form demands its own approach and its own voice, I think, to some degree. I think if I have an approach that like, or a style across the board, I think it's that I have a kind of materialist, somebody said that once and I was like, oh yeah, that is kind of what I'm doing. Like I do have a somewhat like materialist lens on publishing, and I try to sort of like look at trends in a wider, almost Marxist kind of way. I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a Marxist literary critic, but I do think that sort of branch or that like tradition has definitely influenced the kind of work that I'm doing.
I was going to ask this later, but I feel like it applies to what we're talking about right now. Is sort of I am endlessly curious about what social media is doing to like every facet of art, culture, how we ingest information. And I think that it does play a role in how literary criticism is a little bit more amorphous today. And people, the idea, I think, that someone could, just send out a tweet and it has the flavor of literary criticism, but maybe without the necessary depth. And I don't mean that is vapid. I just mean that, kind of to what you're saying, literary criticism is often like a deep dive into something. And the nature of social media being, here's my immediate thought about something right now, I think naturally strips it a little bit of its nuance. I'm wondering, have you observed social media as shaping literary criticism one way or the other, or maybe even how people take in literary criticism?
For sure. I think it definitely has. I think I maybe have the sort of Luddite, scoldy, old school opinion that I find the internet to often be a detriment to literary criticism. I think I got off Twitter and Blue Sky and most social media a long time ago, and I am glad that I did. Although I now think Substack is introducing notes and is kind of sometimes doing a similar thing. But I think like a note, a tweet, etc. is never going to do what an essay can. And I think that it really fragments and fractures our thinking. I don't think it's wrong or immoral. But I do think conflating the two is wrong and immoral. Like I think like reading a book and like having your attention span have breadth, I think is actually really important. And to not just like take in an algorithm. And I think that like the sort of like TikTokification of like book talk or like reviews on Instagram that are like carousel slides about like three takeaways from this book. I'm like, that's not literary criticism. It is its own thing. Totally. And I think People should have fun. I don't want to take away people's fun. But I think if a person who is trying to be a literary critic takes in too much of that style can diminish your own writing. And that sort of like frenetic attention sphere can be a detriment. And I think I like people who have takes. Don't get me wrong. I'm interested in the takes, and I'm sometimes interested in the discourse. But it's very hard to cite the discourse, and it's very hard to sort of write about the discourse. And I think to be able to do that, you then actually have to go and read books and essays and reporting. Right. And I think like part of the reason that we're seeing a lot of magazines flail is because people are not willing to pay for magazines, whether that be, somewhere high and mighty like the New Yorker or somewhere like N+1. Like both places, I think, deserve a role in the sort of sphere. And I think what Tweets does is sort of like diminishes all context, like people's like ability to like understand, okay, this is a piece that came from a magazine. This is how magazine publishing works. Like all of those media literacy skills have been collapsed. And it also, I think people now take in their takes, their opinions, their news in these sort of bite-sized chunks, which I don't think is as fulfilling or as human. But that doesn't mean I don't like or use social media, but I just don't think it's a replacement. I think in a similar way, Substack is not a replacement for legacy media, for having an editor, for having infrastructure. I think it's great and potentially democratizing, but I also don't know if I buy that social media is really all that much of a democratizer for people. I think it has also led to great inequity and harm. Yes. As we've seen with Elon Musk's takeover of X, for instance. So I think it has undoubtedly influenced literary criticism, but I think often in a negative way. It's shrunk it a lot, but also in a positive way. Like also that's how a lot of people have found their favorite writers. And I think a lot of writers used to get big because they went big on Twitter. Like that's, it was a big part of like Lauren Euler and Andrea Long Chu and that sort of era of criticism. But links now are demoted on social media platforms because social media doesn't want you to go off to another website. So even like finding an essay is sort of a difficult thing to do now.
You mentioning sort of having the attention span and sitting down for a while with a piece. I kind of want to go back to you as an author as well. And you saying, writing a book can take a long time. A book coming out can take a long time. And there is something to be said about time in this entire conversation. And I am curious about creative processes for you. Is being an author and being a literary critic, do those two things ever intersect in your brain? Or are you able to commit to one and sort of naturally switch the other side of your brain off when you're writing a book?
Yes and no. I think they do feel like very different modalities to be working in. Like I think writing fiction is a certain kind of alchemy that requires a certain kind of kinetic energy to like create something out of nothing, versus I think writing about a book, you're explicating a text, and that is, there's the bolt of inspiration because you have a text that you have to write about. There's a deadline and a demand. I think most of the time no one's forcing you to write fiction. And while no one's necessarily forcing you to write criticism, it is, for me at least, that is my profession now. So I do have bills to pay. But I think, I don't know, I was told by Brandon Taylor once that like Hercules kind of like also acts as like a work of literary criticism, which I thought was really interesting. Like there's a kind of like self-aware quality to like the canon or the works that it's in conversation with. So I'm sure it has influenced my writing a lot. And I have like also, classic writer thing. I have written about writers for sure and creatives. And so I think in that way too, there's like those anxieties of influence and authority naturally lends themselves to like being dramatized. But I don't know. I think I would like certainly like to write a book of nonfiction, but the right thing hasn't come along yet. But I think, so I think a lot of times I've been asked, like, would you do one or the other? Like, do you prefer one or the other? And the answer is I don't. I think that they go hand in hand to me. And a lot of my favorite authors did both, like Joan Didion or Jenny Diskey or, I don't know, all sorts of people, Amy Dillard. So, or Le Guin even, like, I just don't think that they are necessarily in competition for me. But I will not write a poem. That's kind of where I draw the line.
I can't write a poem, so there's no problem for me there. But I love Brandon Taylor. I say that I think on every episode. I was lucky enough to speak with him a couple years ago for the magazine, and he had a lot of really interesting things to say about being a novelist in conversation with being a literary critic, but also in terms of like enjoying the moment when you're in it, when you're writing, especially if it's like your debut, because it's just such a fleeting thing. You're only a debut once, and the minute you are no longer one, your life is different and people expect things from you. And I'm wondering, like, what is your relationship to being a literary critic in that vein? Like, do you feel, I guess what I'm asking is, like, you, especially with sort of Substack, when you can sort of be responsible for your own like publishing, do you feel like an urgency to get something out after you've done something, or do you just run into the direction of when you feel something, you're like, I want to write about that?
I don't operate Substack well. I don't think that I like have Substack requires a certain cadence and a certain kind of attention to the present tense and discourse that I don't feel like I'm particularly good at. I think there are plenty of people who are really good at it, but I also think a lot of people that I really admire on Substack have over time slowed down. One of my favorite Substacks is like Rain Fisher Kwan. I think she's just a really, really smart writer, and she has done a lot of really interesting like criticism recently, but those take her months to do.
Right.
And so I think usually for me, Substack is a place where I write about something if I don't think someone else will publish it, or it feels too niche, or if a piece for whatever reason doesn't end up getting published, or I can publish it there. Or if I just like have something all of a sudden that feels really important to write about and I just want to get it out quickly. But that's really rare. Like writing about Substack itself in the little magazine, that was a really, once a year kind of a feeling or piece for me. And I really enjoyed writing it. I think it felt like a little bit more inspiring than sometimes the sort of like daily drudgery of like, that criticism can sometimes be if we get too jaded and we're working on piece after piece after piece, which is what is kind of required in order to like break even as a literary critic. It's a lot of writing. And so it's also rare that I have like time to be like, okay, I'm inspired, I'm going to do this. Like usually there are so many other obligations that have to come first. So something has to really matter to me to like write about on Substack for that reason. And I think because I have so many obligations to magazines, Substack is like, Substack eats last. Like that's like the last thing that I'm going to like have time to do.
Yeah, I am interested in, I don't really know Substack very well personally in terms of like the way it works, who benefits from it, and how often someone has to be like posting on it. I had never, honestly, maybe this is my ignorance, but I'd never thought about it in the same realm of social media. And you're so right. Like there is a cadence to all of this that will, someone who's understands it and has the time to do it is going to benefit from it, but it's not the most sustainable, I think, maybe way to get stuff done. And it's impossible to stay inspired in that realm.
Yeah. Most people are not making that much money from Substack. Like I think that's kind of a misconception. It's not that you can just like start a Substack and all of a sudden you're raking in the money. It's usually people who already have a platform who start using Substack who end up making money.
Would you say then maybe a piece of advice from you is to like, not put all of your eggs in one basket there? If you're like, even though maybe there are fewer opportunities, like pitch to magazines that are still out there.
I still think people should pitch to magazines. Absolutely. I really believe in writing for magazines, and I think it's important to have editors. I do think I'm privileged enough that I got to a place where I can do that and have been published by many magazines and have relationships with many editors who I adore. But I think it's worth it, and people should keep aspiring to that and keep trying to do that. I think it's always been a very small field. I don't think it's like an easy career path or a path that everybody gets to do by any means. But I think I don't think it's wrong to publish on Substack. I think lots of people that can be like a really great place to like maybe build a reputation or like figure out your style. Like, I think that is what it can be great for. And if you find an audience through that, amazing. But I also don't think even if you get there, that means that you shouldn't write for magazines or have editors or like all of these things.
I guess sort of going off of that, as we've spoken, you are an author. Herculean came out in October of 2025?
Yeah.
Congrats. And I guess, what do you think, as an author, what do you think other authors can like take from or learn from literary criticism? I think there's maybe some fear there sometimes from authors, like, because the word criticism is built into it, seems so negative.
I actually, maybe controversially, I kind of don't think you can learn a lot. I think too, like, I don't read my Goodreads. I don't think authors should read their Goodreads. I think that you're just sort of like giving yourself a sleep paralysis demon. Like, you're just sort of giving yourself like a parasite. Like, that voice is going to come into your consciousness, and like, it's like things your ex-boyfriend said that like will forever stay with you, and you'll think about like on your deathbed. Like, don't do that to yourself. Like, and then I think, like, you could read, like, if somebody publishes a review in a magazine about your book, like, I think sometimes that can be interesting to read. That can be helpful. I know Sophie Lois reads a lot of her reviews. I think she's really bold for that. Like, for instance, like, I don't know, but that's also like, you're going to read some of them, but I think it's good to be selective about how many you read. I think maybe the thing that I more think that authors should know is, like, you can't, I don't think, publicly comment about a bad review that you get. I think that is bad form, and I've seen a lot of people do it, and I think it's tacky.
Yeah, it is tacky. It also is, to go back to sort of the social media of it all, like, I would imagine that even when you're trying to avoid it, it's the way things work. It is in front of you a lot of the times, even if you don't ask for it. And it is a muscle you have to work to not react, I would say. Yeah.
It's a little Buddhist. But I just think, like, in general, like, I have gotten negative reviews on Herculean. I just don't engage. Like, it's people's choice to, like, once you put something out in the world, like, people are going to have opinions on it. And I think that is normal. I think
it's kind of what you're signing up for.
Yeah, when I was talking to Tori Peters a long time ago before Herculean came out, she's like, as authors, we are signing up to be humiliated. Like, we're sort of signing up to be bullied. Like, and I think that is true. Like, you're putting yourself out there publicly. You're putting out your work. You're putting out your fiction. You're putting out your opinions. It is a masochistic endeavor to some degree. And so I think I don't know. It's like, it's done like an impossible thing to prepare for, especially like reading people talk about your work. And I think it's not that you don't have a lot of feelings about that. I just think that those are, we've all seen feuds happen, which can be fun. Don't get me wrong. But I just think if you can, it's good to stay out of the fray. Yeah.
Do you feel any... Are you levels of anxiety or nervousness about putting out a novel and people's reactions to it? Do you feel any sort of nerves or anxiety when you put out a piece of literary criticism?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, mostly with certain pieces that I've had that have caused a stir. And I think, and that just happens. But I also kind of think if you never cause a stir, you're probably not writing very interesting things. Then maybe you don't have that much to say. Which isn't to say that the only mode is somewhat confrontational or whatever kinds of writing. But I do think you should have strong opinions about things. I think that is the work of a critic to some degree. Like, Nabokov famously hated everything. Like, I just think, like, if you don't have a sort of, like, je ne sais pas list of, like, things that you like, I don't know, like, you have that's not taste. I think part of being a critic is, like, you're building up your taste, and I think that's important.
Totally. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess this is maybe way too broad a question, but in talking about all of this, what do you see as the role of literary criticism today? What do you see it as being more reactive or proactive to what's coming out in, like, the literary landscape?
I think it mostly feels pretty reactive.
Mm-hmm.
I think rarely is criticism currently creating culture, if that could be said. Like, we're not living in the age of Lionel Trilling anymore, or Elizabeth Hardwick, or whoever. And even then, I think their work was really, they were really invested in, like, what is the American canon? What is the American novel? Do we care about that? Like, what does that mean? What are the standards that we hold for that? What counts as a mature work? I think we're less concerned now about the American novel, but I do think we're very concerned with the literary novel and what that means. I think that, like, high-low has just sort of latched onto something else, like different terms. And I do think in some ways a lot of literary criticism right now is trying to, like, decipher what counts as literary, what counts as, like, worth reading for people who are overburdened and tired. And I think, I don't know, I don't think literary criticism right now is really championing unsung novelists. It feels like a lot of times it's regurgitating the same 5 people's novels. You know, everyone's going to race to review the new Ben Lerner. Everyone's going to race to review the new Rachel Cusk. Everyone's going to want to write a takedown when a literary critic writes a book of essays. But also that's what gets a lot of clicks most of the time, is, like, those kinds of pieces. And I do think we're also, like, stuck in this, like, takedown versus appreciation kind of mode where, like, you're supposed to write one or the other and nothing can be sort of in between. And I also think we're really fighting about, like, should criticism be political or should it be strictly aesthetic, and what does that mean? I think these are kind of, like, the core questions that literary criticism is asking, and I think those are all impossible questions that we will continue to debate for forever, probably. And I don't think people have had very satisfying answers. I think there's been a lot of smug answers to those questions, but I don't think there have been a lot of people who are like, what do those things mean? I think, I don't know. And I also just think in general, like, people struggle to care about writing or criticism about books that they don't know about yet, right? Like, I think, like, you're really finding outlets not wanting to write about debut authors unless they're, like, being heralded as, like, the new whatever, the new, like, girl, the new persona, the new thing. And then maybe they will review it. And so, I don't know, I think those are sort of, to me, what I see the concerns of literary criticism right now. I think a lot of those kind of boil down to, like, good or bad representation, which I think can be an interesting question, and I think all of these are questions that are worth asking. But I don't know if, like, literary criticism, I think it feels a little sometimes in a infantilizing position right now.
You make a really interesting point about championing sort of smaller authors, or even writers who are doing things that are off the beaten path or just a little bit different. And it reminds me of someone I knew in undergrad, Luke Geddes, and he had a really, really small publisher publish a work of his that, like, it by their standards did perfectly fine. And then some author happened to have read it and then was interviewed in the New York Times, and they asked, what is she reading right now? And she just mentioned this work by Luke, and no one had heard of it. And that mention alone, and this was like 15 years ago, so this would have been possible then, but, like, because she mentioned it in the New York Times in an interview, people in the industry raced to read it. And then in doing so, he was able to land a book deal with a Big 5 publisher. And that just doesn't happen anymore.
No, it doesn't happen anymore. I think both in terms of, like, I certainly have written about small press books or long dead authors, and they just don't get as many eyes. And I also just think, like, I have not been reviewed by the Times yet. They don't review very many trans books, I don't feel, but that is neither here nor there. But I do feel that it can be here. It can be here and now. But I do sort of feel like, in general, like, a Times review is not selling books like it once did. That is something that I hear across the board from agents and writers. It's not the push that it once was. And so I think in a similar way, even getting a review is not necessarily going to push an author one way or another, especially if it's, like, in one of these small magazines that are generally like going back to the same 500 to 1,000 people.
Right.
I don't know. I wish that it was easier to champion small press books, and I try to sort of say, both on
Sure.
Substack and when I'm asked about the kinds of books that I'm reading, like I try to sort of like say, like, what are the books that I've liked that are not like big five books or whatever. Or like, I think like The Believer has a section that's like only reviews small press books, and I feel like there's a lot of initiatives right now to like review more small press books, because I do think that is where a lot of really interesting work happens. Like, I really love Joyland Editions. I think they're doing really smart work, and Information Age by Cora Lewis is a really fabulous book, or Pratt House Bloom by Austin Wohlers is a really great book, also on a small press, or Harriet Armstrong. Like, there's a lot of Christian Lai on GLA Radio. Like, there's a lot of really fascinating small presses and authors who are like doing work there that are books that Big Five are afraid. I do think like a lot of Big Five publishing has gotten a little bit more conservative.
Risk averse. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the whole economy is shrinking, and I think you can't avoid that. And I don't think it's like, that's not necessarily any one person's fault. If it is, it's, probably not a literature person's. But it does affect everyone. It affects people's jobs. It affects how many editors there are. It affects layoffs. It affects, publications shuttering. It affects, everything going on at the Washington Post. All of these things are a result of like, both like the conservative turn in politics, but also in the economy.
This is kind of getting back a little bit to kind of what you said before, is that there's not much to learn about literary criticism. Like, just write the thing anyway, sort of. Like, it's so hard. The things that used to be sure things for success, we don't know what those are anymore. And in the larger scope of it, I think I get in my head a lot about sort of like the shoulds with writing, because it's like, well, if you do this plus this and this, then you'll finish a book, you'll get a manuscript, you'll find an agent, you'll get published. But so much of writing is void of shoulds, as it should be. And that's sort of a little bit what we're talking about here. But to sort of close this out a little bit, I guess you've mentioned some throughout, but who are some of your favorite literary critics, either working today or historically?
So many. I mean, Jenny Diskey, when she was writing at the LRB, that was everything. That is like someone whose work I really admire and aspire, and she's just so funny and dry and weird and good at like making connections nobody else would. Patricia Lockwood, I think, has a similar but a little more zany tone. I think her literary criticism is just really sparkly and funny and weird, and also in the LRB. I love Andrea Long too. I feel like I learned a lot from her. If there's any critic that I feel like my work is probably really has gleaned a lot from, it is probably hers. I think she is like, I don't think she would call herself a Marxist critic, but I do think she has learned a lot from Marxist critics. So there's that. Frederick Jameson, actually a Marxist critic, also very great. Different focus in a lot of ways, but also I think very smart. I love Anna Hübner-Sessian. She's really wonderful and really smart. I don't know. There's so many people working right now. Becca Rothfeld is great. Is really smart. Lauren Michelle Jackson, really wonderful writer. Jamie Hood. I don't know. I feel like I used to have a Rolodex, and it's just there are.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like it's a time that there are more and more really great critics. Like, there is still room for people to become really great literary critics.
Grace, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much for joining me. I really feel like something that, again, I just get in my head about the shoulds of it all, and what someone might possibly say about it, or what someone might run with and write a long piece about how I did something wrong in something I write. And if I've learned anything, it's just like, just shut the hell up, like, write the thing. And so I appreciate you very much. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I would also just add, and it's okay to be wrong sometimes. We're going to be wrong sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm at Emo Trophy Wife on Instagram, and I'm on Substack, and it's Female Small Business Owner. And that's it. I'm kind of removed.
Awesome. Yeah. Sounds lovely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Writer's Digest Presents. Visit us online at writersdigest.com and make sure to follow us on social media at Writer's Digest for daily updates on articles, online courses, live events, and more. See you next time.